world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Sunday, October 26th, as you're listening to this. And we are still in day 26 of this government shutdown. Now, of course, it was the weekend, or is the weekend, and they are not going to get anything accomplished over the weekend unless they absolutely have to. And the Republicans aren't feeling the pressure yet. They still want to play games. They're not willing to be serious and negotiate and try to open the government. And I think that potentially down the road, once the dam starts breaking and they start giving, I think Democrats are going to take everything they can out of Republicans. And once public pressure gets onto the Republican Party, they may be able to walk away. Democrats may get not just the Affordable Care Act subsidies, not just an extension of the Medicaid cuts or, a delaying of them taking effect or a reversing of those Medicaid cuts. But they may get some other things on their wish list as well. Now, why do I think that? Well, because Republicans aren't winning this government shutdown battle. Public opinion is pretty much solidly behind the Democrats. They see things for what they are. Democrats aren't the ones in power. They don't have control of either chamber of Congress or the presidency. They can't do much other than what they're doing, which is block the continuing resolution from passing. But Republicans could gut the filibuster and pass it anyway. They don't want to. Reason they don't want to is twofold. I've talked about it in a previous podcast. I'll bring it up again. Number one, they don't want to gut the filibuster for anything. They view it as the nuclear option. Why? Because they know that at some point they are going to be in the minority. And if the cards go right for the Democrats in the 2026 midterms, it is possible, maybe not highly probable, but possible that the Democrats could take the Senate in the midterms. Now, if they take the Senate in the midterms with 51 votes, there's nothing getting through the Senate. And the Republicans would be back in the minority. And they could use the filibuster to their advantage and block anything Democrats try to do. But if that doesn't happen and Democrats don't get the Senate back until after the 2028 general with a Democratic-controlled president and say they have the House, they can use the filibuster to block a whole bunch of things that the Democrats would want to get done, which is why the Democrats I believe, are kind of hoping that the Republicans are the ones to nuke the filibuster. If they do, then when the Democrats are back in power, when they have a setup like this, which I think could easily happen as soon as 2028, they would want to take full advantage and pass a ton of things that Republicans would like to object to, like the codifying of Roe v. Wade and things like that, where it would set up new legal protections. And once the filibuster's gone, they don't have to worry about getting to a supermajority. They can just do. Now, the Senate's always been more of a deliberative body anyway, in part because of their 6-year term. They are supposed to be more long-term thinking and looking at the big picture, whereas the House is more reactionary because every 2 years they are up for re-election. They have to more quickly answer to the general public for what they do, the good and the bad. Now, the other reason I think that the Republicans do not want to get the filibuster is they want Democrats to also vote in this bad CR. Some of them realize, like Josh Hawley, like Representative Meeks from here in Iowa, who have both tried to, fund SNAP benefits and prevent some of the damage. And Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, tried, after they passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, to scale back the cuts to Medicaid because of how bad they would be. So they know how bad it could be, and they want Democrats to sign off on it so they get over that 60 vote threshold. So when things start going bad, they can scapegoat those Democrats that voted for it and say, well, it passed with bipartisan support. It's their fault. They could have stopped this. Republicans have set themselves up in a situation where they can blame the Democrats either way. Democrats are blamed because the government's not open and the funding's not there. But then they want to blame the Democrats because when things go sideways after they pass funding at the levels that are currently there. Now, people keep asking, why don't the Democrats just sign this CR, open the government back up, and then negotiate? Donald Trump himself has said the same thing just recently as he left the country. He went on an Asia trip while the government shut down, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But he left the country, and as he was talking to reporters aboard, as he was boarding or just aboard Air Force One, he said, "Oh, I'd be willing to talk to Democrats. I would be willing to have those meetings, but first I got to open the government back up, and then we can negotiate." But Donnie, you were a businessman. You should know better than most of them. This is not how negotiations work. Right now, Democrats have some leverage. They have some control. They have some authority here in the negotiations. If they were to open the government, like you ask, give you the win, which is what you want and what you crave, then they would have no leverage to come to you at the negotiating table and try to convince you to give them what they want. Why would you? You don't need anything from them. Donald Trump is very transactional, and that is how he views things. What can he get? What does he gain? And does it do anything for his image? He doesn't care if people suffer. He doesn't care what really happens. He just wants the Democrats to cave and give in. He'll promise them anything until it's time to actually pay up. And then suddenly you'll get the checks in the mail routine, or he won't actually honor that promise at all. So Donald Trump leaves for this foreign trip. Now he's going to Asia, Malaysia, I think Thailand. I'm not 100% sure of where he is all going in Asia, but he is going on a major overseas trip again. Last time he left, he went to the UK, and he went to the Middle East to sign that ceasefire with Israel and Hamas. The ceasefire that has basically been broken almost immediately. It's a very iffy situation right there. It seems like the peace is going to be shattered at any moment if it hasn't already. And Donald Trump has pretty much already gotten what he wanted. He got his cover, his cover shot. I think he got his news bites, his sound bites of them signing the ceasefire, so he can say, "Well, see, I did my job. I gave them peace, and they squandered it. Well, blame them." And he can wash his hands of it and walk away. But he's going on this overseas trip while the government is shut down. Now, he would have you believe he is some kind of a master negotiator. And if he was, don't you think he should be here negotiating? You would think, but he's not. Because he doesn't negotiate anymore. He threatens. And Democrats have no interest in listening to his threats. They don't have any real interest in promises coming from the Republican Party either. Because back in March, there was another funding deadline like what they just faced in September. And in exchange for funding the government to the end of September, the Republicans promised Democrats that they would discuss the Affordable Care Act subsidies later. Later's here, and they're still saying later. And beyond that, after they passed that continuing CR in March, Republicans came through in July, passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, cut a whole bunch of shit, changed a whole bunch of shit, and then turns around and says, well, see, pass the CR to keep funding levels where we now have them thanks to the One Big Beautiful Bill. Democrats have no reason to negotiate with Republicans because Republicans constantly set them up. They're doing all sorts of things. And, then when it comes time to negotiate in good faith like the Democrats expect, suddenly the Republicans are nowhere to be found. So this whole government shutdown, how does it end? Well, ultimately, I think November 1st might be the tipping point. We're already seeing that letters are going out to SNAP recipients saying you may not get your SNAP benefits. Now, some states do have the funds at the state level to offset the SNAP benefits, which is a good thing. But then we're also seeing that some states just don't have those funds, and there just aren't going to be SNAP payments going out this month in November if they don't open and fund the government. Now, what is unclear is how this would affect everything if they end up not reopening the government, say November 15th. Now, some people inside the Trump administration are trying to say that, and I think they're saying it to put pressure on Democrats and saying, well, if we don't open the government till the 15th, we're not going to back pay those benefits. Basically, if the government is not open on November 1, they are not sending out state food assistance money for November. Now, I don't know if they can actually do that, although we've seen with this administration with numerous things, that doesn't entirely stop them. Now, what they could do, it is entirely possible that Republicans and Democrats, when they craft whatever continuing resolution ultimately happens and they open and fund the government, that they put forward some kind of a payment thing in there to back pay those SNAP benefits to make sure people have access to food. Now, there have been two bills introduced. I don't believe they have been voted on in either house. I know they haven't been voted on in the House of Representatives, but they're essentially the same thing. And they would fund the food stamp program, nothing else, but they would fund food stamps or SNAP benefits for the foreseeable government shutdown. And one of those was introduced by Josh Hawley of Missouri. I think I talked about it yesterday. And the other was introduced by a Representative Marianne Miller Meeks, a Republican from Iowa. Now, both of those bills sound great on the surface, but it's weird that Republicans are desperate to save food stamps. It's like they know if you cut people's food off, it's going to be bad. But then you look at the One Big Beautiful Bill, and they cut a bunch of money that goes to help people get food, not just food stamps and SNAP benefit assistance, which is the same thing if you didn't know that. And they also cut money that would go toward food pantries and food banks. So people are going to be struggling because of Republicans. But now they want to try to pass some kind of thing and salvage and save food stamps. Why? Because much like Donald Trump, they want to appear like the hero. If they come out and they come up with a plan and they save the SNAP benefits for the month of November and people can actually afford and get something for Thanksgiving, well, then that just means that they're the hero. They get a claim of victory. They get to rub it in the Democrats' face. And they hope that people will forget that they're the reason the government is shut down in the first place. Again, as we talked about just a little bit ago, Republicans have complete control. They have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the presidency. They could pass anything they wanted by gutting out the filibuster and saying, okay, we're going to get it done. We're going to pass it. We don't need Democratic support. But instead, what are they doing? Well, they're saying we got to, keep the filibuster. We're not doing that. So you Democrats have to come around. But they're also not negotiating. So ultimately, I think they may, because we can tell they're feeling the pressure by introducing bills like this to make sure SNAP benefits and stuff get paid. I think they may start to cave. And then when those negotiations open up in earnest, Democrats may be able to use that as an inroad to be able to get other things. It is entirely possible that once this is all said and done and when the government is finally reopened, that the Democrats could have played the Republicans for, say, an extension of 3 to 5 years on the Affordable Care Act subsidies at minimum, and a reversal of, say, 50% of the Medicaid cuts at a start time of, well, we'll start that in 2029 or 2030, well into the next president's term. Now, Republicans may actually like that because they like to set up time bombs for other presidents to deal with when they think they're going to lose. Remember, during Donald Trump's first term, he passed his big tax and spending plan. Now, that also led to the government being shut down, but they get it through, they get it passed, and it had in there tax cuts for the lower and the middle classes. But those stopped in 2021, and your taxes were going to start to go up. But they said it that way on purpose so that if Donald Trump had lost in 2020, like he did, then that would give them cover. And they could blame the incoming president, which in this case was Joe Biden, and Joe Biden got the flack for taxes going up. He took the heat. He didn't pass anything. He didn't pass a tax plan. They were operating under Donald Trump's tax plan, but they set up a time bomb to go off in the middle of his term to have him take the fall for something he had nothing to do. So I think Democrats could actually sell that to Republicans. But then once those negotiations start happening and they get a cave on the Affordable Care Act and they get some kind of a give on Medicaid, maybe they get some kind of a give on food stamps and other food benefits, etc., especially if public outcry is large enough over missing the November 1st food stamp payment, the SNAP benefit payment. Now, something I've been seeing by creators on the right, and I'm sure we've all seen variations of people talking about this. First of all, you have the I think it was the burnt toast lady or the peanut butter toast lady, whatever she was eating. It was toast of some kind anyway, where she's sitting there talking about people who get food stamps and saying, well, what did you do with October's food stamps? Well, they did what they should do. If you got food stamps in October, though, that money is supposed to go to feed you in October. Now, most states, I know Iowa is one, where they estimate that your food stamp bill or your food stamp allotment is only supposed to cover a percentage of your actual food need, and that you are supposed to kick in at least some money into your food budget. It is not meant to be the sole thing you live on. But a lot of people still do. They live on just whatever they get from food stamps. But again, Republicans are so good at branding and convincing people things are something that they're not. They have convinced people because they can find a few outlier cases of people either getting ridiculous amounts of money, usually because they have lots of children, or because they found a way to glitch the system and they got money they weren't supposed to, or whatever the case may be. You found people that got a large amount, way more food than other people seem to think that they should be able to eat on and live on. And then you also get the rare occasion of where they find somebody who is doing something like, well, I'm going to sell my food stamp money. And then when you do that, that is actually a crime. But they find a few cases of it and they blow it up, make it sound like it's a bigger deal than it really is. So that they want you to believe that everybody who gets any sort of government benefit is, lazy, could be working, is entitled or feels entitled to that kind of money, and that nobody actually deserves it. But of course, what they tell themselves, especially the Republican voter, if they're on the system, that, oh, they're legitimate. It's everybody else who's the problem. And they have this mindset about it. Well, this lady who was eating toast, like I said, she said, what'd you do with your October food stamps? It's not like they get a large sum of money per month in most cases. it's a couple of $100 at best for a single person. Now, if you budget and you get, very limited in what you get, you can stretch it and you probably can do very, very well. But this isn't a thing like Republicans want you to believe that they have some kind of, way with using the food stamps to end up eating better than most people. And I know a lot of ignorant people who will say something dumb like that. Uh, and if somebody splurges for a special occasion and they decide that, hey, you know what? I'm going to eat lesser quality meals the rest of the month, but one day, maybe it's a birthday, maybe it's some other special event, or maybe because we're going into November, it's just Thanksgiving, that they are going to go all out and do a big fancier meal. They should. They shouldn't be shamed for being able to, eat like everybody else and celebrate like everybody else, whatever the case may be. If they decide to live very meagerly the rest of the month, then they should be able to go use those food stamps however they see fit. But Republicans don't want you to buy into that. The other thing is there was a guy on TikTok, I'm sure you guys have seen the clip, where he says, I can't wait for my groceries to go down 30% because people aren't getting their SNAP benefits. Well, he's just uninformed because he doesn't know how SNAP benefits work. Now, there is a section of the Republican Party, or at least the Republican voter, that seems to think that if you get SNAP benefits, it is 100% off coupon card that you just go to the store, you show them the card, and you get everything in your cart for free, and the store just takes a loss. And if that was the case, not a single grocery store anywhere would accept it. Period. They wouldn't. Why would they? If you had to show up, unless it was federally mandated that they had to take it, and it was some kind of a card where they just had to eat the loss and give you whatever food you desired, for free to you, and they ate the loss, they would never take that. They would never accept it. No, what actually happens is when you're on food stamp assistance, SNAP benefits, you are allotted so much money, whatever that number is, whether it's 300, whether it's 100, whether it's $50. Um, I knew somebody who was on food stamp assistance, but because they worked too much throughout the year, they were only getting $17 in food assistance a month. It helped, but it wasn't enough to feed them. It ate a little bit in, and they used it to cover. They got a lot of cheap items to fill in the gaps where their paycheck didn't fit. But still, whatever that number is, they give you a dollar amount, and then you go to the store, you buy the items you want, you check it through the register like normal, you run your card, and they check it against your available balance, which updates in real time. And then if you don't have the money, you don't get. If you have $200 worth of food and you only have $15 in your EBT balance, you only get $15 worth of items. You got to figure out what you're going to get. It's not 100% off discount card. No grocery store would ever accept it if it was. But see, Republicans, again, they either don't know what the system is, they don't know how it works, and they're just willfully ignorant, but they are so loud about being ignorant because they don't know what they're talking about. But they say it very loud as if they are speaking from some kind of an authority. Now, the other issue that could pop up with SNAP benefits not getting paid out is, I don't know for sure, but I think SNAP in some states is much like Medicaid, where there are a lot of people who are on their state version of Medicaid. But because it is renamed something else, they don't know it. For example, I think it's called Hawkeye Care here or something in Iowa. I think in Tennessee it's like TennCare. I think I can't remember what California is, but a lot of states have different names for state Medicaid, but it is still using federal Medicaid dollars. just because it's not called Medicaid. So when they cut Medicaid funding, which is what the Democrats are fighting to get restored, those people on the other programs that are, just a renamed version of Medicaid, but because they don't realize it's the same thing, their benefits are going to get cut too. But they think they're safe because they don't realize what's actually going on. Now, Donald Trump woke up this morning, or yesterday morning, I guess, and he was in a fit on Truth Social, and he went after some of his favorite targets. He went after Christopher Wray, former head of the FBI, that Donald Trump put as head of the FBI. He went after Merrick Garland. He went after Jack Smith and a few other people. And he said that they went after him using this Operation Arctic Frost to wiretap federal employees, to wiretap senators and representatives, to collect evidence, all in an effort to prevent Donald Trump from winning the 2020 election. And they were all part of the Biden administration's efforts to prevent him from winning in 2020. The presidential election in 2020 was held on November 6th, November 3rd, I don't remember, early November 2020. Joe Biden became president January 20th, 2021. It would have been impossible for Joe Biden, before he became president, to use the FBI, the DOJ, Jack Smith, any of that, to do any of the things Donald Trump was claiming. Now, there's one of two things with that post. One, either he is A, suffering from severe dementia, which is highly probable, and he has cognitive issues, and just doesn't remember when he was president from when to when, and is just trying to spin up a story to go after his perceived enemies for slighting him, and they're going after him because he's also trying to reverse the narrative about him losing in 2020 because it still bothers him. Donald Trump, as a narcissist, hates being viewed as a loser. And that's what he was in 2020. He lost the presidential election. That's why it was such a big deal for him to run again and win again. He had to avenge that loss so he could go out as a winner. Now, he goes out. That's one of the things. Is he demented? Is he having cognitive issues and he just doesn't remember when he was president? Or is he straight up lying to the American people? Or there is the third option. And maybe if it wouldn't have been for all of the other problems with Donald Trump, I would give him this benefit of the doubt. But he hasn't earned it because of all of the other dumb shit he says and does. Like saying that he was going to Russia when he was actually going to Alaska. When he, would talk about sharks and boats and batteries and the late great Hannibal Lecter, or when he was in, I think it was Egypt the other week, and he talked about how the Air Force One was buried completely underneath the sand just several weeks ago, and now look at it, it only comes up to the windows. When he says things where nobody knows what he's saying, that gives me reason to think it is not the simple fact that he just got it wrong, that he meant 2024. Now, it's entirely possible that he just did, but it is hard to give him the benefit of the doubt when all of the other things are going. I don't think Donald Trump is mentally or physically well enough to make it to 2028 to run again. Now, a lot of people are worried because Steve Bannon comes out and says they have a plan, that they are working on a master plan. They've got all these ideas, and Donald Trump will run in 28 and he will be president. Except I don't know how they do that without either A, getting rid of the Constitution, B, changing the Constitution, which they don't have the votes for, or C, the Supreme Court completely and totally reinterpreting something that is pretty cut and dry, like the 22nd Amendment. Now, 22nd Amendment says specifically that no person can be elected to the office of president more than twice. Well, Donald Trump has been elected twice. It doesn't say anything about consecutive terms. If they had meant you could have non-consecutive terms and, have up to two and then take a break and come back for more, they would have said that, because by the time they passed the 22nd Amendment, Grover Cleveland had already been president for two non-consecutive terms. It was already a known thing. They would have said that. That is not even close to anything. So Donald Trump is not going to be around in 2028. I don't think he lives to 2028. In part, why do I think he's not going to live? Well, look at his health. He says all these crazy, demented things where it looks like he may have dementia. You've got his health issues. You got him making weird trips to Walter Reed, claiming it's just a yearly physical, but he's already gone once this year already. He gets the bruising on his hands. And they've told us about the vein issue. And as I've said before, if they're willing to tell us about that vein issue, how bad is it really? What's the real secret? Now, assuming Donald Trump doesn't make it to 2028, that leaves us with J.D. Vance. And is J.D. Vance worse than Donald Trump? Yes, in that I think what J.D. Vance wants to do is way more evil than what Donald Trump wants to do. But is it going to be worse under J.D. Vance? No. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. One, I don't think J.D. Vance has the same sway over Congress that Donald Trump does. Cut and dry, Donald Trump has a way of getting this Congress, specifically Mike Johnson, to do whatever he wants. So when J.D. Vance becomes president, assuming Donald Trump doesn't make it to the end of his term, he's not going to be able to call up Mike Johnson or whoever the Speaker of the House is and says, hey, I want this done, make it happen. It's not going to happen because he doesn't hold that same power. Beyond that, there's that 30% of the voting base. Donald Trump has access to 30 to 35% of their voting base who only show up to vote when Donald Trump is on the ballot or when he's making a lot of noise about that election. And Republicans are worried about losing that voting base. So J.D. Vance isn't going to have the sway over any of it that he currently does, or that Donald Trump does. And depending on how Donald Trump goes out, if they have to use something like the 25th Amendment or they impeach and remove him, J.D. Vance is going to be looking over his shoulder going, oh shit, that could be me. I don't want to be next. And he's going to walk the line. So I don't think Donald Trump makes it. But one of the other reasons why I don't think Donald Trump makes it, look at everything he is doing, how fast he is escalating and ramping things up. He's talking about potentially starting us into a land war in Venezuela, in part because I believe it was Maduro, the Venezuelan president, who called Donald Trump out for committing war crimes and blowing up these fishing boats, I believe, or maybe that was the Colombian president. Either way, Donald Trump is not happy with the current president of Venezuela right now. And he's trying to claim that he's part of some cartel and that he's actually helping to run all these contraband and these illicit substances and all of that. And Donald Trump is ramping things up. In part, I think he's ramping up because he is afraid that he is running out of time. Then you add into the fact that he has more than once recently been talking about whether or not he makes it to heaven. Now, from my experiences of being around older people who are getting closer to death, the closer that it seems to be at hand, the more they talk about things like that, or the more they're ready to go, the more they talk about things like whether or not they get to heaven. And then you look at what he has done to the East Wing of the White House. Now, from what I can tell from the images I have seen, it looks like the East Wing is gone or mostly gone. and it will be gone here shortly. After promising that his ballroom was only going to connect at one little point and they weren't going to damage anything, they completely tore out the east wing. Now, some people are suggesting Donald Trump is planning to build some kind of a bunker under there, and he's going to go and make his last stand or something like Adolf Hitler did, something like that. I don't think that's the case. But he's moving forward with this ballroom that nobody wants because he's worried about his legacy. He's going to name it the Donald J. Trump Ballroom, and he wants it done before he goes so he can see it in all of its glory and he can do all of those things, and he can enjoy it. This is about his legacy. Now, he's going to go out with a horrible legacy. He's going to go down as one of the worst presidents in American history, if not the absolute worst. And his name is going to be one we just don't talk about in a positive light. He is going to have a horrible reputation. He is going to live in infamy for everything he has done. And what happens when Donald Trump doesn't make it to the end of his term or doesn't make it to the completion of his ballroom? Now, if he doesn't make it to the end of his term, J.D. Vance is probably going to try to finish building the ballroom. Unless it is to the point where, like if it's in the next few days where nothing is really started, he may not. He may opt to rebuild the East Wing. But what happens if the ballroom's completely done or mostly done and a Democrat comes in? Do they tear it down, rebuild the East Wing? What do you do with that? I don't know. Because on one hand, I want to see it torn down and rebuilt as the East Wing like it should be. But at the same point, I'm also looking at it, while I am not fully a fiscal conservative, I understand the idea of wasting money. And that would be a big, giant waste of money for us to have paid for it once, turned around, and it gets done or mostly done. And then just because of who built it and because of how they went about it, turn around and gut it. I don't know which is the best option. That next Democratic president is going to have a major decision when it comes to that ballroom and what they decide to do with it. Now, one of the things you're going to see from magazine, from Trumplafucks, and they've been all over my comment sections talking about how Obama did it too. Obama, put in the basketball court. Obama had 2 basketball hoops attached to an existing tennis court out of the way like you would see at a high school, and they painted some lines. Probably cost a couple of $1,000 top end. Wasn't a big deal, and it didn't affect the structure of the White House. Now, when Harry Truman gutted the entire building back in the 40s and pretty much started over, except, he gutted a big chunk of it anyway. That was done with congressional approval, congressionally appropriated funds, and it wasn't done under cloak and dagger, which is what we're seeing here. The images that we are seeing do not line up. Now, I'm seeing videos from architects and other people in the field that are saying that this ballroom, with what they are claiming, the size doesn't match up with the images that they have posted for what the interior looks like versus the exterior, that there is a big discrepancy in the square footage. They're claiming it's going to be something like 90,000 square feet, but some of the images of what it would look like from the inside barely look like it's 30,000 square feet. Now, taking Donald Trump into consideration, I'm not entirely surprised. Why? Well, what did he get in trouble for? What were his civil penalties in New York for? The almost $500 million. That was for overvaluing and undervaluing properties and lying on tax forms, etc. And one of the things that they proved in court that he would do is he would lie about the square footage of his venues, of his properties, when he went to go get a loan. Because if it's a bigger place, it's worth more. and he could prop it up and get a bigger loan that way. So it wouldn't surprise me if it's actually a 30,000 square foot ballroom and they're going to try to claim it's 90. But the other thing is that I've seen videos talking about is that it is far overvalued for what they are trying to say. By that, they said conservatively, one of the highest estimates that you should get, even on a high end federal job, for something as uh, detailed as what the ballroom is supposed to be, etc., would only be about $1,000 a square foot. But the price tag, what Donald Trump is now floating that is going to be over 300 million, comes out to about 3,000 a square foot. So what's going on? Is it a grift? Is he going to find a way to grift some off the top and maybe run it through a company that he owns that is in construction? Maybe. It wouldn't surprise me because it's Donald Trump. And that's part of the problem here. We don't know what's going on with this. Now, he claims it's being uh, funded by private donors. But there is a partial list out there of some of the companies that have donated funds to it. And I think that's worth looking into and looking into those people that are on that list. And for those people that decide to look into it and decide whether or not they want to support those businesses, that is, something we're probably going to see in the coming days, weeks, and months as things progress here. But Donald Trump tears into the ballroom almost immediately after No Kings. It was like the same week. Why? Because 7 to 10 million people went out, peacefully protested, carrying signs, and basically told Donald Trump to go fuck himself. That we don't want him, we don't view him as a king, we don't prescribe to his view of how he sees himself, and we hurt his little feelings. So his big way of owning us, I guess, or showing who's boss, was to demolish the East Wing of the White House for some gaudy ballroom that nobody really wants. Now, even if Donald Trump had gone to Congress, got approval, had gotten all the funds, there is still an issue with how they have torn out the East Wing. One, there are environmental concerns because that place was probably full of asbestos. Did they do anything to prevent that from being, moved around and contaminating the area around it? I guarantee you no, especially not with how fast they were moving. They just came in, took a backhoe to the East Wing, and just started tearing it out. Now, did Donald Trump have anybody go through? Did he have a historian go through to look for any historical artifacts and make sure all of the things that were in the relics that were not, needing to be kept out of there, were they properly stored and moved and dealt with? Probably not. Is there a chance that there are pieces of American history that were in the East Wing that he did not remove that have now been turned into rubble? Probably. There were supposed to be, historians, there were supposed to be archivists to go through and figure out what needed to go to the National Archives and what could be saved and what should be repurposed into, whatever they rebuild down the road. None of that happened. Why? Because Donald Trump is a toddler. He got embarrassed over No Kings, and his reaction was to tear down the White House, or at least part of it. Now, Trump-fucks are going to try to give you an excuse about all of the different things that Obama did or that these other presidents did. None of them pale in comparison to just deciding to rip out the East Wing of the White House. This is after he paved over the Rose Garden. And that isn't something that can just be brought back. The Rose Garden was planted by Jackie Kennedy when she was First Lady. Sure, the next president could come in, tear up the concrete, and plant a rose garden, but it will never be the same rose garden. The history there is gone. But again, Donald Trump doesn't care about history unless his name's on it. Now, That wasn't the only thing over the weekend that was sticking in Donald Trump's craw. He's also pissed off at Canada, and he's cutting off negotiations with Canada on any kind of a trade deal once again. Why? Well, one of the reasons is because I believe it was the province of Ontario uh, had put out some ads using a speech from Ronald Reagan talking about the evils of tariffs and how using tariffs on a national scale or a global scale on every sector is bad economic policy. How using them against like certain industries or certain particular products can be very effective in the short term, but it is not a long term strategy, and how you can't use them against every product globally. Oh, Donald Trump was big mad. Why? Because the one Republican that probably out Republicans Donald Trump is Reagan. He is still considered like the greatest Republican almost ever by a lot of people. And Donald Trump is being made to look like a fool by the words of Reagan, and Donald Trump isn't happy. So what's he going to do? Well, he's going to go ahead and he says he's not going to do any trade deals with Canada right now. He's going to back out of any negotiations. Cool. Problem is, there shouldn't need to be any negotiations, Donnie. Why? Well, you put us into the US Mexico Canada agreement, which we basically agreed to no tariffs on anything going either direction from any of those three countries. The United States to Mexico, Mexico to the United States, United States to Canada, Canada to the United States, and Canada to Mexico, Mexico to Canada. We agreed that it would be basically free trade between the three countries, and we could just move product as we see fit. And that was effectively what we had under NAFTA. NAFTA was the North American Free Trade Agreement that was signed into law by President Bill Clinton in the late 90s. And that was a crowning piece of economic accomplishment for Clinton. But Donald Trump comes in, says it's the worst agreement he's ever seen. He doesn't know why anybody would want to be signed under it, etc. So what does he do? He rips it up, takes us out of it, renegotiates, and he gets us NAFTA with a different name. And he signs on to the US Mexico Canada agreement. So he does that. And now he is saying this is the worst agreement he's ever seen. He doesn't know why anybody would have signed off on it. How did we ever get into such a predicament? And now he is saying, well, we need to put tariffs on Canada. And he's violated the agreement that he put in place numerous times by all of his tariffs for Canada. But we were talking through it, and they had plans for negotiations. And now this ad comes out. Donald Trump gets his feelings hurt again because he's a toddler. And he goes ahead and says, I'm not going to negotiate with you. I'm not going to talk with you. That is just ridiculous, but that is who Donald Trump is. Above and beyond anything else, Donald Trump is a petulant toddler, and he only cares about his perceptions, and if you embarrass him, he's going to embarrass you. All right, so yesterday I did a story. I was talking about this $130 million gift from a mysterious Donald Trump donor to the U.S. Department of Defense. And this $130 million was supposed to be a gift to make sure the military can meet payroll. Well, there's multiple problems with this, but we found out a little more. Apparently, this is a gift or a donation by Timothy Mellon, a major Donald Trump backer, who donated lots of money to help get Donald Trump elected. It wasn't somebody we heard a lot about. He even donated tons of money right after Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felonies. So he chips in $130 million. Now, what kind of a quid pro quo is there going to be here for this Timothy Mellon? Is Donald Trump, what does he owe him at this point? Because Donald Trump is transactional. Now, if Donald Trump thinks he just got this because this guy is such a great friend and there's no strings, He probably does, and he probably wouldn't view whatever request comes his way as being, you know, any sort of a string or a quid pro quo. Donald Trump is just that way. He's looking for a short term fix, and this gets him out of harm's way, potentially for the military. Now, I have not seen anything confirming that they were able to actually meet payroll. And I don't know that they actually did meet payroll for the month of October, or the first paycheck in the month of October, because they found several $billions. I think it was like $8 billion in unpaid grant money. But I did a Google search before I started this podcast here, and it looks like, if I'm doing the math right, wages alone for the military and the Department of Defense as a whole run about $60 billion a year. Now you divide that by 12, that comes out to about 50 billion for the year, or for the month. So if they had to pay out 50 billion for the month, that means to meet payroll for the first half of the month, they would have needed 25 billion. But they only had, I thought it was like 8 that they had found. Well, that doesn't add up. That math doesn't work. And then you look at this $130 million gift, and that math really doesn't work. You can't stretch $130 million into, you know, what, 50 billion? It just doesn't stretch that far. Now, there's other issues that are going to be looked into as well, because there are rules about what the military can accept. This is another gift that the Department of Defense is accepting on behalf of Donald Trump. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're claiming this is for payroll, but they have to actually try to shift this money over to maybe help fund the renovations on that expensive plane that Donald Trump didn't need. Remember, earlier this year, he accepted a gift, and the Department of Defense accepted a major, like $400 million plane from Qatar, and it's going to take, tons of money to retrofit and make usable as Air Force One. So maybe this was a way of him getting money put into the coffers to cover that, but he found a way to divert it through by saying it was for payroll, because Donald Trump doesn't care if he lies to the American people. What's one more lie? If he tells them that it's for payroll, but it's actually going to fund the retrofit for his plane, he gets the win by saying, hey, I found funding to keep the military paid. I'm the hero. Whereas if he comes out and says, well, this is going to help retrofit the plane, but, oh, I'm such a good guy, I'm saving the government money. Here's the thing. We didn't need a new Air Force One because we already have 2 new planes that were being bought to be Air Force One, that Donald Trump had bought during his first term. They are set to be delivered by the end of 27, maybe early 28 at the earliest. Now, some people are saying it may not actually show up until 29, and Donald Trump may not get to enjoy these 2 planes that he purchased. But Donald Trump is getting this gift for payroll, and now the military is going to have to answer questions on it. Eventually, there are going to be questions that they have to answer about why did they accept the money. We know a little more about who at least donated, supposedly. And now we need to figure out, was there any sort of this for that coming out of this arrangement? Because it wouldn't surprise me if there is something that this Timothy Mellon wants, and Donald Trump would be more than willing to give it to him, because this gets him a positive headline right now. He can play the hero even though he's not, and say, hey, I figured it out. I got the military paid through the government shutdown. Even though $130 million, well, it's a staggering amount of money for most people compared to the $50 billion monthly payroll. It's just not that big of a deal. It's just not that much money by comparison. It's a lot of money, yes, but by comparison to the full payroll of the U.S. Department of Defense, it's just not much to talk about. Now, today, Donald Trump is traveling. He is heading on this Asia trip. We're going to have to see what all stops he makes on this trip in Asia, what he all does, and how he embarrasses us again on the world stage. Because it's at this point, it's not an if. It's just a when and how does he embarrass us by going on these overseas trips. Now, some of the countries, I know he is limited by where he can go with his status as a convicted felon. Some countries will not let him enter, so he is having to do things like, pick where he travels and only go to certain spots. And some places are waiving his travel restrictions in part because of his position, that he only would get those restrictions waived because he is currently the president of the United States. Now, he is only president because he was trying to evade criminal charges, and we've talked about that before. But if it wasn't for the fact that he was president, a lot of these countries would not let him in because, much like the United States, they don't want convicted felons coming into their country. So Donald Trump going on an overseas trip, he's completely ignoring the fact that his own government shut down. It's going to be interesting to see how foreign press ask him questions about the government shutdown, and maybe they will get a more direct approach compared to what it seems like almost all the media here does, which is give Donald Trump softball questions and never really follow up and don't hold his feet to the fire about anything he says. It would be nice to see somebody in the media, even if it is a reporter for a foreign publication, while he is in their country, hold his feet to the fire, force him to answer questions that he doesn't want to answer, and not allow him to do this, duck around it, give half answers, or just blame Democrats for all of his problems. But Donald Trump is going to embarrass us on the world stage. We know that's coming. That's everything I've got for you today. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. I'll be back tomorrow because there's always stuff to talk about with this administration. They're constantly embarrassing us. They're constantly fucking things up. And there's never a shortage of things to talk about.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.